Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Voice of Authority, brought to you by Carter Jonas and Future Built and GLE and London Square Partners. My name is Toby Fox, and I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. One of the ways we're doing that has been by interviewing public sector leaders and senior officers to give our network a deeper understanding of the vision for a place and how it'll grow and evolve by hearing from the people shaping that vision and what makes them tick. You can find an archive of over 250 written and recorded interviews at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Now, the format of our live interviews is really simple. We ask the Voice of Authority 7 questions, and the first 3 are going to cover their wish list and the challenges they must overcome to deliver that list and the partners they're seeking to help them with it. And then we're going to ask our Voice of Authority what constitutes good development and who or what has shaped their views on development and growth, and the watershed moments in their life and career that have led them to our screens today. And then finally, we'll ask what they get up to outside of work. What are the interests and passions that drive and motivate them? And we're absolutely delighted that today those questions are going to be put to the Royal Borough of Greenwich Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Good Growth, Councillor Denise Scott-McDonald. Now, Denise, you're a former financial journalist and on radio and TV in the States and the UK, and current lecturer at South Bank University. You've been a councillor since 2014. You joined the Cabinet with the transport portfolio in 2018, and you became Deputy Leader last September and took up your current role in May. And in that time, you've had 2 unsuccessful attempts to be selected as a candidate for election to Parliament, but a successful attempt to be elected as President of the Co-op Group National Members Council. You're also a director of Greenwich Millennium Village, which is adding another 800 homes to the 1,095 already built, and of the Greenwich Peninsula Company, which is building 15,000 homes in North Greenwich, 15,000. So you've got quite a spread of interests. What we'd like to do is focus for now on regeneration and good growth.
Okay,
perhaps
right.
you could set out for our viewers what that covers. You know, what is regeneration and good growth, and in terms of your work at the council, and what are the top 3 items on your good growth and regeneration wish list?
Okay. So I think my top 3, I'm going to start with my top 3 items because I think that's the best way to explain me. So number 1 is equality or inequality. That for me is a driving force within me all the time. How do we make Greenwich much more fair for its residents, much more fair for the people that work here, much more fair and equitable for everyone, whether they live in the poorest part of the borough or the richest part of the borough. And if you know the borough itself, it's not just Greenwich Town Centre, where there is a large accumulation of wealth and there's the historic area. But as you go eastward, and this is very generally speaking, I don't want to say completely, the poverty levels increase, the health inequalities increase. So there's some challenges there that have been there for some time, which we've, as a council, we've taken on board. Especially, I know since I've been a councillor since 2012, and that's been my goal. So when I talk about equalities, I'm not just talking about, making sure you make the quotas in different parts of the department or whatever. I'm not talking about that. When I talk about equality, a few years ago, actually, I've been on the Cabinet a little longer than what you said. I got. Do
correct me, please. Yeah. Give us state it for the record.
I was councillor in 2014, and then the next year I was on the Cabinet. My first portfolio was public health, but I very soon got pushed into culture, which covered sports and recreation and the big events. Now, in that portfolio, one of my jobs was to deliver leisure centres for the borough, our co-location. That was the thing. So within the first few days, and this is part of my equality thing, the first few days of taking over that portfolio, they opened the Greenwich Centre in Greenwich. Now, Greenwich Centre was a combination of the leisure centre and the library coming together, and it was built around a square that had residential on top, had some businesses also into it, but it was a different way of looking at our library and leisure services, whereby it was co-location, bringing people in a building for all sorts of uses. And it's become this huge hub of activity and focal point in the community. And within the first few months, the number of people using the leisure centre went up sevenfold, really dramatically, because they closed down the leisure centre and the library. And when I walked around it, I thought it was absolutely amazing, absolutely brilliant. But then about a month or so afterwards, I was with the officers going for a site visit around the different leisure centres that we have in the borough. And I went into the Plumstead Leisure Centre at that time. And when I walked into the building, it was actually heart-wrenching. It was called the Warehouse, and it was 2 separate buildings. And there was literally water running down the walls. And another room, there was all mold. Another room, it was freezing cold. There were people engaging with that building. And when I saw that, I went, you know what? The people of Greenwich have a bloody brand new leisure centre. And I said, the people of Plumstead, the other part, the eastern part of the borough, deserve that. And so I made up my mind that we were going to do all we can to deliver that leisure centre. And we've delivered it, and it's a focal point, and it's brilliant. And they closed down one building. There was a grade 2 listed building. They refurbished, and it's fantastic. And it's become a hub of activity for that area, and a sign of pride, and also a placemaking, as well as part of a bigger picture of that area of Plumstead, of regeneration going on in Plumstead.
So you saw the sort of inequality in leisure provision there, and
absolutely, yeah.
So what else is there inequality in the provision of? What else would you like to see being built in towards the east of the borough, or in some of the less affluent parts of the borough? What's missing?
What's missing? Well, one thing, we need Crosswell to open. Sorry, God, we need Crosswell to open. God, so many people have been waiting for that in the Abbeywood area. And I've done in transport, I did quite a bit of lobbying in there to get that going, to get those projects and those infrastructure projects. And there's a number of things to do with bus connection and infrastructure that we need to get going and supported. We need the DLR in the Abbeywood area. All that supporting regeneration is really important for that stuff to happen. In Plumstead also, what we're doing is redoing some of the storefronts and do some placemaking there. We've got some funding from the mayor on that, and we're actually match funding that money to get that work going. So there's that area that's going on there. What more area things? Where we've got the Greenwich Build going on. Greenwich Build is our own project to build affordable housing. This will be council housing. That's another way I think we can address inequality. Build just over 700 housing to build, but we have that across the borough. That's not just eastward in the borough. There are about, I think, somewhere between 35 to 40 locations, even here in Peninsula, where I am a ward councillor, where we will have affordable, like truly affordable, not the other stuff, which is just as important within the marketplace. But these will be rented out to local residents. We've got 19,000 on our waiting list, I think. It's massive, it's huge. So that's also another thing, our Greenwich Build project.
This all kind of goes back to your studies, doesn't it? You studied. Go
on. What did I study?
Was it? All right, it was humanities.
Humanities, yeah.
But I remember reading that concept of fairness has been something that's been really significant and important for you.
Yes, I mean, yes. My dissertation was, I won't tell you what the title was, but my dissertation was about underdevelopment and how underdevelopment is created around the world and things like that. But yes, it's been a deep passion of myself for a long time, and it's part of the reason why I got into politics, was to address that, or try to address that. And it's very
great stuff. What else is on your wish list?
The second thing on my wish list, and that some of it overlaps with inequality, is climate change. It's a big thing right now. In Greenwich, we've been working on it for some time, and I know over the last few years there's been this sort of massive explosion with protest groups and young people protesting, and also with the report from the IPCC, I think it's called, from the United Nations, and they're going to do an update report, which they're gradually releasing more information about their latest report about the temperatures. And some of that overlaps with inequalities, because people in poor areas want clean air to breathe. People in poor areas, and I use it very loosely. People of all sorts of income, they want to be able to recycle. They want to be able to live in homes that are energy efficient. They don't want to pay those expensive energy bills. They want to play their part on the planet. So climate change is a huge issue for us as a borough. We passed a strategy in 2016, but we revisited the strategy later on, whereby we made a commitment to be carbon neutral. So that's going to be passed in our cabinet meeting coming up very soon. But climate change is one of my big things too, to do with. And also, if you look at the world, it's awful because especially the developing world has experienced firsthand with, rivers rising and water temperatures changing and the whole lifestyle changing too. So, but climate change is a huge issue.
What can you tell us about that climate change plan, that new strategy? When are you going to be carbon neutral by? Okay,
so I know across London, a number of boroughs said that they had different figures. We went with a large portion of them. So 2030 is our target for carbon neutral. I know there's one London borough that went 2025, but if you look at some of the detail, it's a lot more narrow about where they put it. And some boroughs have gone as high as the government's level, which is 2050. So we went for 2030. And that is about what we can control. So we have to be very realistic here. It's areas that we can control. So there's two parts of it, I loosely put it. There's areas we can control and we can actively engage. That's our buildings, that's our council builds, the homes, residential, as well as the business, where we do our business. And then there's a part about influencing too. And for that, we need our partners to be on board. So some of the biggest employers, we haven't got that many in our borough. So the council is one of the biggest employers, the NHS is one of the biggest employers, and the schools and education are one of the biggest employers. So looking to our different partners, as well as developers too. We've had conversations with our developers too. When we declared a climate emergency, now this was before COVID, and we got people together. We had different people in the room, including some of the big shops, as well as the CCG, as well as some of the big developers in the borough, as well as some of our head teachers and stuff, all in the room together, saying as partners, we as a borough need to move together. We can't do this alone. In fact, when you look at the data, it's our buildings that are the ones that generate into those numbers, the high numbers of our carbon footprint. And just below that is transport. But it's the buildings that are the ones that are.
Okay, we'll come back to some of the challenges involved in that in the next part of the interview. But firstly, is there anything else on your wish list?
Okay, my last one. That was hard. The last one was hard. Sorry, because there's so many things that overlap, and So if you gave me 10, I could have filled all 10. So I think my third one is technology, and what we do with it, and how we use it, and how we make it available for our residents, and how we make it available for businesses, and how we make it, so then this can come in all sorts of shapes and forms and sizes, so so I'm a councillor in the Peninsula area. So Peninsula, it has since 2014, it's experienced lots and lots and lots of buildings being built and regeneration. But what I always thought was really interesting is once these blocks were built, and the marketing part of the developer side would go, this building has internet access, and and so it was so for the first few years of being a councillor, a lot of my postbag was when we applied, when we moved in, or when we bought our flat, they told us we'd have internet access, and I work from home. And a large portion of our population, of people that live in the borough, actually work from home. We have a high number of people who, small companies.
Pre-COVID?
Yeah, pre-COVID. So, so it's interesting. So that's just one area of making it, accessible and making sure our schools, when we're developing our schools. So you got a question? I was just going to ask.
So what you're saying is the developers didn't deliver the internet access that they said they were going to?
No, it took quite some time.
Yeah.
Quite some time. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to quite name names, but it got all the way up to Parliament, and it could, because it was a national issue that was happening with, and there were issues because there were parts of London that had no connectivity, but yeah, out in the countryside you could have connectivity. So I know in Greenwich we are piloting a project. We just got some funding, and so we're piloting the project in one of our council estates to test like improving connectivity on one of the blocks area in the Woolwich area, and that's part of our Digital Greenwich wing of the council. And if it does very, very well, we found a partner to work with, then we're going to start rolling out. So we're not just, it's not just the new build, but we are looking at our council stock to see how, they could make life better for our residents. And it's not just about, so they can play video games or, download, I know that's important. That's really important. That is important, because if you look at the people that go into the libraries too, and how you create a modern new library, you do have to factor in download times and things like that. But there's also, because lots of council services are online. If you want to apply for a job, if you're talking about inequality here, if you want to apply for a job, you have to find ways so that the most vulnerable, the least person on your list, population can access this, and they can do that. Or if someone wants to start their own business, things like that. So so I think that's it. So it's equality, climate change
and technology.
And technology, so it's about how's the borough, because in our manifesto, it's, we want to create Greenwich as a great place to live, Greenwich as a great place to work, a great place to,
play video games.
And play video games.
I couldn't help myself, sorry. Okay, well, let's dig into some of the challenges that surround some of those ambitions. Then, what we're trying to do is set out for our audience, which is largely a sort of development and growth industry, some of the things that you're looking to address. So those are some really clear directions as to the things that Greenwich would like to see happen. But let's look at some of the challenges involved in delivering them. Around climate change, let's start with climate change, because that's such a big issue for every local authority, for every person at the moment, and given the headlines at the moment in Greece and California and elsewhere as well. So how are you going to address the kind of premium that's required to develop to manage buildings on a zero carbon basis? I mean, if you're going to renovate buildings to low carbon standards, it's going to cost a lot of money. Can you see a sort of a way forward for that, for your housing stock, for your civic buildings, for other buildings that the council owns? How are you going to address that challenge?
All right, so on some of the things we've already been addressing it, and it wasn't the declaration of climate change helped to focus our mind a little bit more than that, but we have been trying to address that. So and we've been procuring green energy, green electricity. We've been doing things like building low carbon homes. So within our Greenwich Build, we've been doing things like building low carbon homes and putting solar panels on that. I think we're in the planning process. We're going to incorporate some of this in the planning process. The thing is, we can't do this alone. So I think if developers are going to sit there and go, well, it's going to cost us too much. We saw the fires on TV, and so we all have to step up to the plate. That's what I believe. We all have to step up to the plate. I also think the GMV development, a lot of people signed up to the GMV development because they really believe it's a development that cared about the environment.
Can you explain GMV?
Oh, sorry. So Greenwich Millennium Village. So Greenwich Millennium Village is, if you know the O2 area and all that development around the O2 area, the GMV was like the first phase. So I think it was the first lot that was built. So during, I think it was Tony Blair, when they declared that they were going to create a new neighborhood, and they identified like the massive brownfield site, former industrial areas, and said that these were going to be these new areas in London. And one of them was in Greenwich, and it's called the Greenwich Millennium Village. So, and it won, the first phase won lots of awards. Now, if you talk to a lot of the residents in there, they talk about the fact that the development won awards. They talk about the fact there's an ecology park there. So I think it's really important when we design our homes, when we think about our homes, some of the first things residents say to me is, what's the sustainability record? So it's a partnership. You know, there's things we have to do in planning, there's things to do when we have conversations with developers, but at the same time, they're not off the hook. They have to come up to the table and say, and they do, they come, this happens, they come to us, we have this great idea for Greenwich, and we think, and then when we say, what's the sustainability record? What can you deliver? What can you show us how you're going to make this area improve the biodiversity? Or is it going to be solar paneled? Is it going to be energy efficient? You know, and sometimes we look back at previous things and what went wrong, previous energy things that didn't work properly and resulted in people paying more money. So it's a conversation. Sometimes it's not an easy conversation, but I think if developers are serious about it, then they get on board, and many of them do. Many of them do are really excited to say, this is what we're doing. We're using the latest things to create a better. For example, I don't want to use names. So, for example, like Sainsbury's. All right, the Sainsbury's was built in Greenwich. And it was like a Teletubby shaped one. So everybody called it Teletubby. And it had a wind farm thing, and everybody celebrated, and everybody was really excited. And then Sainsbury's said, we're moving. And they said, and people argued, you said this is the most sustainable, this is the most ecological, whatever. And then they said, we're going to build one that's even better. Yeah. And I think for developers, they are about that. They're about building that thing that's better, that's much more energy efficient, that's much more sustainable. And so that's the people I talk to, and that's what they say to me. So I think that conversation in partnership, yes, we have to do, we've got our Greener Greenwich strategy that we're going to sign off later on this year, and we've got a climate neutral plan guidance, SPD, that we're working through, and that's in draft form right now. So we're going to work that through into the planning process, but it begins with the conversations that we're having.
Well, you mentioned the excitement around that Sainsbury's development. I saw there was a bit of excitement from you on Twitter when you had the autonomous cars news in the borough. So, and we've actually got a question in from Mark Jenkinson, who's watching. He's asking if you've actually taken a ride in it. It's a self-driving vehicle. Have you sat in that and been autonomously driven?
Okay, so there are a number of different autonomous vehicles out there, and it depends which one. So there's one which is actually a car. there were these hubs which kind of moved about. I've never been in one of those, but I've been in the one that's actually looks like a car, feels like a car, acts like a car.
And how was it for you?
It was interesting. Because what happens is it goes from automatic, or not automatic like in a traditional automatic car, to manual. So apparently when you're driving in the car, when it senses not danger, so sometimes if something happens suddenly, it would switch back into manual mode. So I have to tell you, I was in the back seat. I wasn't allowed. Apparently, the insurers don't allow me in the front seat. And in front of me were two guys. One guy who had a racing car background and had done the police test, so he can race cars. And the other guy was the much more geeky engineering guy with all the tech stuff all around him.
That's the guy I want in an autonomous car.
Yes, yeah. So, but then as we were driving around, like the bus got really, really close, and then it sends a warning, and then it switched, and then the person took control of the car. So it was interesting, and it also has what you call machine learning. So it keeps learning all the time. Every time it makes mistakes or things happen, it absorbs that and then puts that back into the programming. So it was interesting.
Did you feel that's kind of the future of transport, of private transport in Greenwich?
Oh yeah. I mean, actually, when I was thinking about my priority, that was the thing I was thinking about, was because it was last week I took the drive, and when I was in the car and I was around Kidbrooke area, which is another regeneration area and everything. And I just thought, this is the way of the future. But I quite like technology anyway, and I think it will transform lives. And for so many people, I think it means quite a lot. So, for example, I found out that the number of people taking driving lessons have dropped dramatically. I know COVID has affected the numbers recently, but they're on the decline. And a number of my friends who have teenagers, their kids aren't learning to drive. And obviously, probably when you're in London, you probably don't need it so much. But I think that's really interesting. So what does that do to our built environment? How does that change it? We're all using things like Uber and things like that. But, how does that affect our environment, the driverless car? So
yeah, we had a session that involved, it was a webinar, a panel discussion, and we involved, I think it was Bromley. It was an outer London borough, Bromley, and their view of this was very different. Their view was that the car is absolutely still the primary mode of transport, and the problem they've got is that car parks aren't big enough. Because the cars have increased in size, and I wonder if those trends that you've noticed amongst younger people in Greenwich, if those are going to be repeated in outer London boroughs, or if there is still a real cultural difference between outer London and inner London in terms of public transport and the ease of getting around without a car. Have you noticed a difference between the sort of the more peripheral areas of Greenwich and the more central areas of Greenwich, or is it right across the borough that kind of decline in the use of cars is happening?
It's interesting because you made a very good point. So when I led on transport, I had to go to London councils with my counterparts from around London, and it was interesting that the transport leads who led in more the urbanized, the mindset was very different to a lot of the transport leads who led in outer boroughs. So you may have a point there, but yes, I mean I know in parts of Abbey Wood, which is much more green than probably Greenwich town centre. Greenwich town centre area, Charlton area, very well connected. Even Woolwich, very well connected. But the further east and the further south, which is the Eltham area, they're much more dependent on cars.
So would you still, to a developer who's building in those sorts of areas, would you still say to them, look, we're expecting you to put in facilities for private parking and so on and so forth? Or are you going to be across the borough, we have to have a blanket change in the way that we transport ourselves around the city? Okay,
so we've made a commitment to increase walking, cycling, and in our borough, and so we've made a commitment to bring the number of people, to increase the number of people who walk, cycle, and take public transport. There's a work that needs to be done on public transport, which is what I talked about before, with everything from the bus priority routes to the expansion of the DLR and things like that. Our policy is very much we discourage. And it's been going on for quite some time, and I know a number of London boroughs have been doing that, whereby we have parking, like development with no parking or very, very limited parking, and that's part of an overall a number of strategies and a number of approaches to trying to get people back into walking, cycling, and taking public transport. There's improvements that need to happen. So there's areas of the borough where people would like to see more lighting. So it's not just about telling people you can't drive in your car, but it's also looking at certain parts of the borough and saying, how can we improve the public realm? Because there's data that shows that if you have an area where there's poor lighting, less people are more likely to walk, and even walk to get a loaf of bread, but they'll drive somewhere to get a loaf of bread. And some of that data supports, people in wealthier neighbourhoods tend to have a much nicer public realm. They're more likely to walk. There's data that shows that, while people who live in poorer area, this is general data, won't walk because they feel unsafe. So it's about creating those safe environments. But we have our policy is either very limited parking or no parking at all. And the more well connected your area, the chances are, which creates problems as we're going through this.
Plenty of challenges in there. But it's a good segue, because the next question I wanted to ask you was about the partners that you're looking to work with in delivering your ambitions for Greenwich, and the sorts of values that you want to share with them. You mentioned the sort of approach to climate change. You've mentioned an approach to equality and inequality, and you mentioned an approach to sort of a commitment to low traffic development as well. What can you describe the sorts of values that you're looking to share with the companies that you work with, and maybe how your role within the cooperative movement is influencing and shaping how you interact with partners?
Okay, all right. The first thing I do have to say before I answer any of those questions is that if anyone is looking to be a partner, they really have to do their research before they approach us. Because I mean, even though I've been in this position as regen on a very short time, I've sat in a number of meetings with developers where they knew absolutely nothing about the borough, or they were using data that we didn't recognize or anything like that at all. So I do think it's really important that if you're going to have a conversation, you check your facts and know your facts. Because the last one meeting I was involved with, it was a little bit embarrassing. And then later on, they had to provide the data where they got the information from. And so I think that's really, really, really important that you do that. We're also a cooperative council, which I don't know if, so most of our councillors are cooperative councillors. And so this informs a lot of things we do. It informs things like we try to make sure there's shared decision making, and an engagement with the public. We have quite lively and engaged residents. And increasingly it's moving, usually it was only in one part of the borough, but increasingly it's coming across in all the different parts of the borough where people are very, very, very engaged. And I think COVID must have made people even more engaged. So they're all on computers or something. So
yeah, I'd be quite interested, can you unpack what a cooperative council is and what a cooperative councillor is? How is it different from any other council?
So for us, it means that we look at things like procurement. We look at procurement very differently. We have certain values and principles. So the cooperative movement is guided by certain values and principles. And that values and principle is not just about profit or the bottom line. It's about bringing in something that makes you stand out and makes you very different in the whole scheme of things. So, for example, in terms of, I think we're one of the only boroughs in London where we support our voluntary sector in a very large way. And the fact that we do that is because I think because so many of the councillors are very passionate about making sure that we support this sector because it does tremendous work in our communities. But what that meant is that during COVID, we could actively turn to this group of people to help deliver for us and deliver things and deliver not just food packages or medicine, but also help us to drive our numbers down in terms of infection rates and things like that. So in terms of, we can do things like that, whereby we look, and we also used a cooperative company called GCDA, which is a cooperative which sort of came out of the, some of the people that work there came out of the council and helped to do that. So I suppose for me, being a cooperative councillor, it's again, it's about values and principles. It's about how do we make sure we apply value in all that we do. So it's how do you call it? So some of that value is to make sure there's women involved, make sure women are part of the voice, or make sure the different voices in Greenwich, whether that's ethnic or age or class, make sure those things are involved. Some of that value is about trying to make sure we work towards equality in all sorts of ways. So when we look at procurement, when we look at commissioning, which is a slightly different thing, are we being fair and equal in all of that? Are we engaging? Are we implying? Because a lot of times in cooperatives you have a lot of voting all the time. So it's about, do you have a democratic or some sort of democratic or consultation in the professional sense, or engagement? Are you having those conversations in all the different things that you do? The fact that we support the voluntary sector so much means that we have to have those conversations, and that means sometimes having those uncomfortable conversations. So
does that sort of constant voting on decisions and so on, you can see the upside is that everybody feels represented and everyone's engaged and involved in the conversation. But is the downside that sometimes your strategy will veer from one direction to another as different voices are heard and votes are taken? Do you find it difficult to maintain a kind of consistency in your engagement with organisations outside the council?
Okay, so you talked about a strategy. It wouldn't change our strategy because we're embedded within our strategy is the fact that we do have those conversations. I suppose you're talking about the direction of travel, I think. I don't know, or maybe we might be talking about terms, I don't know. I think there are challenges to that. and I don't know necessarily whether, okay, I think some of the challenge in that democratic is sometimes the people that shout the loudest aren't necessarily the ones that are not the important. What's the best thing way? You have to be really careful. So for example, some groups will shout really loud and then they'll repeat something that's on a blog site. All right. And then they might repeat something that's on the news. Okay. But then when I go canvassing and I think, oh my God, I read this blog site, I've got this email, I've got, like, and I think this is what these people on this road believe. And then I go canvassing. And as an opportunity, when I'm doing canvassing, I kind of try and pick up what's on people's hearts and what's concern of them. And a lot of times when I do that and have those conversations, like proper conversations, it's very different thing you find out. And that's why I love face-to-face canvassing, because you can listen to the blog site, you can listen to those that are shouting the loudest, and that's not what it is. And sometimes what's sad is some of the most articulate people and the most people who are much well-heeled, and also some people who have local government experience are very good. Those lot, you know, not that they can't be, to be ignored, but you know, all right. So for example, you know, IKEA, I'm going to talk about IKEA. I don't want to mention names, but IKEA, all right. And this is how the different groups think. So I went to one civic society and they said, no, we don't want IKEA in Greenwich. Went to another civic society. No, we don't want IKEA in Greenwich. Went to another group who are quite active residents. I'm not going to name the groups. No, I'm not going to. So, and then IKEA said to us, you know, as ward councillors, because IKEA is in, and they said, who should we talk to? So we gave them a list of names. And then there was one group of people, and I said, there's one group of people, and they are the residents on our council estates. So I said, they're very honest, and they're going to be tough, but you be honest back to them. But they're a very different group. IKEA walked through the door of the residents group, and the people from the council estate said, when can you get me a job for my daughter? You know, when are you open so I can get a job? While in the other groups, they were saying something very, very different. And I thought that was interesting. And so sometimes as a councillor and as a cooperative councillor, you have to weigh up those different voices. Yeah. And IKEA did provide jobs for people. And I've met people who found jobs in IKEA. And
that's a fantastic framing. Thank you very much indeed, Denise. Let's and again, it leads us on really nicely to the next section of the interview, which is around good development and development either that you would point out and say that's the sort of thing we want to see in Greenwich, or development that you're particularly proud of being involved in.
See, the thing with that question is I've got to be so careful, because some developers will say, quote me and say, Denise said on so and so and so and so that we were the best developer or whatever. So I just want to be very, very careful how I answer this, because it's not just about the development, it's also what happens afterwards. And I think sometimes when we look at regeneration, we think of it as building a building, and then we forget about what happens afterwards. And so, and sometimes it's the people coming together and working those things out. So I suppose I could point to the first phase of the Greenwich Millennium Village and how that's kind of, and if you go into some of the flats there, it's like full of light, and it's really, and I quite like that, how that it has that light. Also, it's a great location right next to the train station, and also it's a lovely way where it's been starting to mixture. It's got open space and people can move about, and I think for me, a development that does that allows a place to change and transform and grow and contribute to placemaking. I mean, I always like the sports centres, because I think they do something quite significant. So Plumstead Sports Centre and library, very, very important. The Greenwich Centre was really important. But I do want to point something out at the Greenwich Centre, even though I'm really proud of it. And I didn't get to sign off on it officially, even though it happened, it opened on my brief. The developer created a space for childcare. And apparently through the planning process, they did provide a space for childcare, a childcare company or something. And when it officially opened, a lot of people looked at that space and said they couldn't work there in that space. So that's really interesting how sometimes they can have, a developer can have this incredible, and it's a great development. I mean, I love it. I think it's brilliant and fantastic, but it's interesting that childcare space wasn't really thought out with well. And
just a little bit of consultation was needed with some of the organisations, the operators that might use it. Yeah. Well, we've talked also in the past about how development needs to kind of cater for particular age groups, and one of the focuses for you has been the sort of young kids. So pre kind of I'm going to show my age by saying GCSEs, O levels. Right, GCSEs are a new thing for me. But kids at the age of like 9, 10, 11, 12, and how development kind of caters for them. That's something that's close to your heart as well. Have you seen that done well anywhere?
Oh, no.
So that's an ambition for you. What kind of things would you like to see?
I think, it's something I share with officers all the time. I share with the officers that work in planning all the time. I say, please, factor this in. And, I remember I shared it with you. And the reason I've seen it is because in Peninsula, we have a lot of regeneration going on. And since 2014, I've seen this thing going on. I think for me, it would be spaces that can easily change in use. So inside space, we're talking about inside space, but also outside. So outside space where people can play a basketball game and they don't get loads of complaints. And so it has to be placed in the right area. So there's one development along the river where they made a football, basketball space. It didn't last very long because once the kids started playing, the sound ricocheted up the building and it didn't work. So placing those outside spaces in places where people can get access to, but it doesn't necessarily undermine the welfare of other people around it. So I've seen some of that done better on the GMV, where they've actually got a school, actually 2 schools now on those locations, and they've built those schools so the schools are outward facing, so those spaces can be used that way. So that's good. Sometimes when you just slot it between 2 massive blocks of flats, it doesn't always work as well. So good design around and good thinking about that space. And also I'd love to see the developers talk to the kids. Actually, I don't actually hear much or find a way of thinking of how can you talk to young people and kids about what do they want from their neighborhood and their community, or maybe invite them into the conversation. Most of the time their conversations are with the civic societies or councillors like me or adults who have time to read the planning application and things like that. So maybe that would be really good if they had more time to have that conversation, and also good insights. And
if they don't, you end up with that sort of it's sort of bordering on antisocial behaviours when you've got lots and lots of kids who come out of school and then maybe they can't go home yet, or their parents aren't home yet, or they just don't want to go home yet, but there's nowhere else for them to go. It's that kind of age group you're looking at, isn't it?
And it's also interesting because what happens is the more they build out, the more I don't want to say it's antisocial behaviour, but that sort of that noise. So when I talk to the management companies and things like that, who for the different developments, they all complain that as different developments build out, the complaints they get about this age group of children increases. So what can we do? As a council, we try and do our best to support things like after school activities and things like that, but I think the process can be much easier if developers would take on board some of those things. But stuff. I just think spaces need to be designed, so it's not just about those kids too. It's like, so because what happens with a lot of new development is young people move in and then they hook up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and then they stay, and then suddenly there's a kid pops out.
That can happen.
But then you see the development grow, and I think it would be nice to see more spaces where people can have their knit and natter classes. I don't knit, even though Tom Daly knits at the fix, So and things like that, and then see places transform and things like that. I saw this development in Wimbledon and I thought it was really good because they used the atrium of this building, the 2 floors. It was double height atrium, but they built this layer between the 2 floors, which was accessible to the public. and I had an art exhibition in it at the top. And then I spoke to the guy who was working on the front desk on the floor, and he said, yeah, they use it for different things like children's parties, art gallery. They have meetings in that space. So it'd just be, it'd be nice to have more.
Was that just an office building?
No, it was a residential building, in I think Wembley area. And I went to an exhibition.
Wembley, not Wimbledon.
No, Wembley. Yes,
Wembley. Yeah.
Sorry,
okay.
yeah, it was
That's
Wembley.
Right.
I remember walking through. Yeah.
We're just steering your potential future partners towards examples of things that they should be doing or looking at before they come to Greenwich and sit down for a grilling by you. So to make sure they've done their research. So that's great. We've given them plenty of pointers. Let's talk a little bit more about you and your background and what's shaped and influenced these views. Can you tell us who or what are the main influences on your outlook to planning and development and growth?
Oh, God, I don't know. I don't know where you can pinpoint it. I mean, I'm a geography student, so I like you. I did geography O level, geography A level, and I have a geography degree. So you said humanities, but it was geography major I got in the end, which was my main study. So I've always liked geography. Other than talking about, capital cities and rivers and the highest mountain, you learn also about the built environment and you learn a lot about planning. So I think that stuff I've always got quite excited about and how buildings are built and what they look like and how they create. I think also being a councillor, and I'm in Peninsula Ward, and I remember when I first got selected in Peninsula Ward, we would talk to developers at the time, and people would say, you've got one of the probably most active wards in probably London, maybe even the whole of Europe. That's what they said to us as ward councillors, and said there's so much regeneration going on, and there's a lot of wards in the borough where that's not happening as intensely. So it's an incredible opportunity to actually see communities be created from absolutely nothing. So when I was a councillor, only a portion of the Greenwich Millennium Village was built along the river, Enderby Wharf area that wasn't built. There's a number of areas all across just our little patch. And so I think seeing, and then also watch those areas being built, watch people move in. I talked earlier about people living in together and having babies, and seeing that morph and transform. I think that's shaped me a lot.
What about as a councillor? I mean, how do you're deputy leader at Greenwich Council? What do you think defines good leadership? What's the difference between a good leader and a bad leader?
Oh God, loads.
Well, tell us who your heroes are.
Who my heroes are. My heroes are people like Martin Luther King. I think it's I think to stand in the face of huge violence and to campaign for the rights of individuals. And I think one of the things about Martin Luther King is that he cared actually more about class. And there's a part of him where he started to campaign on class because he felt that was really important. I think that part gets ignored. And also they passed the voting rights bill. I think it was 68. I could have the date wrong. So what happened in America is to vote, you had to read. And for many Blacks, but the other thing that people forget is also poor whites couldn't read too. And so anyone who couldn't read, they had to read a card to vote, and they got rid of that. And so that law actually brought equality to a lot of people. I mean, the story of the Black story gets highlighted more, but it was a law that transformed so many lives. And for me, that Martin Luther King is one of my heroes.
What about in the modern day? If you were having a dinner party, you could invite anyone from anywhere in the world, from current times. Who would you most like to have dinner with? Or would you most like to go for a walk in the park with?
That I'm not related to, or dating, or oh God,
you can date them.
All my friends always say, Denise, you always love talking to everyone. You're always the last person to leave the room. when we go to a party, you know, and they always, and so I absolutely enjoy listening to people and hearing their stories. And I suppose that's why it's not a gap, it's just, I mean, it's, and also another thing is I'm very good at talking to people who are really important and people who are the most humblest person on the planet. So for me, hearing their stories is really, really important, and I quite like that, and I quite like listening to people. And there are some people that they're not famous that I could sit and listen to. There's a woman who mentored me when I went on the council, and she I mean, I could sit and listen to her for ages because she talks about the cooperative movement in a human form, like, and you know, so there's people like that who I like, and I can sit with. And there's some women within the political Labour movement that I have a lot of time for, and I really respect. And
who?
And some of these women
name names. Let's give them a shout out.
You won't know them. There was a woman named Ivana, not Ivana, but is Ivana, who was the former chair of the Fabian Society. Brilliant woman. Before she was chair, we used to have chats about women in leadership, and I thought she inspired me to go for a parliamentary seat. And so I quite like her. She's fantastic. There's, gosh, I can't remember. There's a number of women that I admire.
Who did you most enjoy back when you were a journalist? Because a lot of what you're saying kind of relates to your career as a journalist, doesn't it? You like listening to people's stories. Who did you most enjoy interviewing? Were there any real highlights? Were there any kind of really amusing or inspiring interviews that you managed to grab?
Elizabeth Catlett. She and I actually won an award for a journalism award for covering her story. She was an African American artist who was during the time of MacArthurism, and she lost her American citizenship. She was American born, and she lost her American citizenship because of MacArthurism. Amazing woman, and she believed that art can be used to transform life, and she believed that art should be like really great quality art should be for everyone. And so she has a piece at the White House. I don't know under Trump might have got rid of it, but I know under Clinton and probably Obama kept it. There was a piece at the White House, but she's got a piece at any major exhibition in the country. In the Met in New York, she does. And this is a story. What happened was during, I think it was still segregation. She was teaching in New Orleans. Okay, she'd lived in Chicago, and she saw a Picasso exhibition come to Chicago. She saw the exhibition because there was no segregation in Chicago, and then she got a summer job teaching in New Orleans. However, the students weren't allowed in the museum. They were Black students, so they weren't allowed in the museum because the museum was surrounded by a park that said whites only. So what she did, she negotiated with the museum and with another university lecturer. They hired a bus, hid the students in the bus, drove the bus through the park. The museum was closed on Mondays, and allowed the students to come to, and the museum allowed the students to come in, and they had the whole museum to themselves. And then when they had finished, she hid them back in the bus, and they drove out through. And I think someone like that, who was determined, and this was art, she totally believed art wasn't for everyone. And that's what I think when you talk about equality, she totally believed it, and she totally lived it. And so, and even in really precarious times, that's what she did. And she said, okay, I've got a group of Black students who've never seen brilliant artwork. I've seen brilliant artwork. I'm going to get them to see it. And and I think someone like that is really fantastic. Inspiring. Yeah.
Great stuff, Denise. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it crosses real bridges as well. I was interviewing Councillor Barry Wood, who's the leader at Cherwell District Council in Oxfordshire. Different political party, totally different environment. He was talking at length about how important culture and art is in transforming lives, and how he wants to make them. It was the new mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough saying he wanted to make culture and art at the heart of all regeneration happening across the mayoral area. So I think that crosses a lot of bridges.
Yeah, I think people are just getting it. I know it's going on in Manchester. I know it's going on in Preston. I know it's going on around the country. I know historically it's gone on in London in different parts. You know, I mean, you could look at things like the South Bank and how that's transformed that area and community. The Barbican area too. It's another area that was a former council estate. Now it's really expensive, but I mean, yes, you know. So
what about you mentioned earlier someone who inspired you to campaign to get selected to run as an MP. What are the watershed moments in your career? What are the moments that, you know, if something hadn't happened, you wouldn't be here today talking to me about regeneration in Greenwich? What were the key kind of turning points?
Oh God, what are the key turning points in Greenwich?
Well, I can make it easier. What brought you back from the States? You moved out to the States to study, and you got a job, a successful career in journalism. What brought you back from the States?
I had I still have a son. He was very young, and I didn't want him educated in America. I mean, I just felt I had certain views about American education, and I felt America was very, I mean, I love Americans. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love America. I love living there. And I love the American people because there's an honesty in them and a real, and you know, it's quite, well, in England we're a little bit stiff upper lip, and you know, it takes us a long time to get around. But I was so concerned about education, and that's why I wanted to bring him. I felt like my son would have a better education here.
And what about the moment when you decided, right, I'm not going to be a journalist anymore. I'm going to be a politician. I'm going to become a councillor. Well, how did that happen? Okay,
that's a process. So what happened was, as a journalist, my family was very young, and it was a real challenge to kind of be at home, and I was hardly ever home. My son was very young. So in the end, I decided to go back to freelance journalism. And then while I was doing freelance journalism, one of my friends suggested, why don't you teach journalism? So I went into teaching journalism. But actually, it was, the friend I met was in the same school. This is all right, it's get complicated. I'm going to try to give the short version as much as possible. So it was my friend, it was a group of mums all in my son's school, and we were all chatting and talking. And then I decided to run for the parent governor of the school. I didn't get the parent governor, but the head teacher said, you know, you should try and do something in the community, because then we could actually get you on to the governing body as a community rep. So I got involved with the political party. And then when I got involved with the party, I suppose I started to attend meetings. And then I got sick and tired of just making coffee or stuffing envelopes. And I said, I want to be a councillor, which was really, that's the interesting part, because a lot of times in that political world, you have to kind of push yourself forward. And so in 2011, I missed out on the opportunity to run as a councillor. And by the time I found out, because it was so cliquey and everything, they were like, I didn't know you want to be a councillor. And so I determined after 2010, when I didn't get that opportunity to be a councillor, that I would make myself known. So I ran for positions within the party locally, and then sort of did projects locally. And actually I did a housing conference for the local Labour Party, where we got someone from Barclays Home, John Anderson from Barclays Home, to speak. We got Nikki Gavin, she was the housing rep, I think, for London on the London Assembly. Nick Rainford was the MP, so he was really helpful in getting the housing conference together, which was really good, which was a great discussion. So that my love for housing and stuff like that, it was even back then. And has it been same in terms of getting a cabinet position? You kind of have to push yourself forward and make yourself heard. Yes, yeah. In politics, yes. And politics also, the thing is, you may never ever get the opportunity again. And that's what my friend Vanna told me. You may never get the opportunity again, and what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, so take that opportunity, and when the door's open. And so that's the thing in politics. And I think for a lot of women, we're not like that. they're amazing in some sense, because they just like, you just say, oh, you should be a councillor, and they're like, yes, I am, I'd be brilliant, you know, I should be president, I should be prime minister. Well, women are very different, so you know, as a woman you kind of have to also convince yourself that
I'm not sure many men I know would respond with it quite that way to that suggestion. I certainly don't.
Maybe we know different groups. I know, or maybe I'm surrounded by lots of councillors who men. Well, my profession, it's mostly men. They're much older than me, and they've got probably plenty of time to think about how great they would be.
To be fair, I think most of the men I know are pretty sure they could score a winning goal in an FA Cup final. So it's probably the equivalent, isn't it? What about outside of work? What about when you're not being deputy leader at Greenwich Council? What is it that gets you out of bed on a Saturday morning? What are the kind of drivers and passions? What are the things you do when you're not working?
All right, now I do have to confess, I don't really have much time.
You're a politician, I understand. You're doing a lot of canvassing.
Yeah. So if I'm chilling out on the weekends, I quite like, I mean, I try to go to exhibitions, and now we're opening up. It's quite nice now being able to start to get back to going to galleries and exhibitions and things like that. So that's quite nice. I quite like to do that. When I'm not going out, I actually love TV. I love watching TV, but I don't get to watch much TV. But I actually absolutely love sitting on the couch watching TV.
What are you watching? Are you watching documentaries about Picasso? Are you watching Coronation Street? Are you watching box sets of Friends? Or
yeah, I was at another event and someone said, oh, you know, everybody on the panel wants to say, what do they do? Or, you know. And it was one of these types of questions, and I have to confess, I absolutely love watching Gogglebox, and I just think it's at the end of the day when there's nothing else to do, I absolutely love watching Gogglebox.
All right, so
it's so funny.
Gogglebox. What are your favourite commentators on Gogglebox? Which ones do you like best, and which ones don't you like?
Oh, I don't know which ones I don't like. Okay. See, I like the old Gogglebox, not so much the newest much, and they have a celebrity Gogglebox, which is okay, it's fine. The old one, I liked. Well, hang on, I don't know whether they're old or the new. There's the brother and sister one, the brother and sister. I think they're quite funny. They had one with the two black ladies. Yeah, and there's one quite fat. I loved them. They were quite funny. I love that very, very middle class couple. Who always had alcohol. And there's another one who are very intellectual, quite middle. I can't remember their names. And he's quite tall, and she sits in a small chair, and she has his hair.
Everyone who watches Gogglebox knows exactly who you mean.
So I like watching Gogglebox. So, but
what about you're lecturing. Are you still working sort of fairly regularly? How much of your time do you spend at university?
Okay, so that's another correction. So I got laid off from my teaching during COVID. So so I did, but I was teaching at South Bank since 2011, and So
are you looking to pick that up again? Because we need more teachers, right?
We need more teachers, but it depends where you want to teach. So the sector, the higher education sector, is going through a lot of change, and so I know they need teachers in secondary, and I know they definitely need teachers in primary school. But I know that the higher education area, which higher education means the university sector, there's a lot of change going on there, and about what do you do? So some of the I mean, I love the kids. They were brilliant. They're the most. I mean, I love but the politics of being in the academic is very different. I mean, I'm used to politics in my world, but the politics of academic world, it's like they'll argue over the size of a classroom or their lecture room. It's just so it's a very different beast. And also, it depends on the direction of travel of the leadership of your university. So, and I think a lot of. So, for example, sometimes my class size, so I also taught at Roehampton University as well as, so before I became a councillor, I actually was teaching at 3. I taught at the Royal College of Art, I taught at Roehampton, and I taught at South Bank. So, and then when I became a councillor, I dropped Royal College of Art. And then when I got into the cabinet, I dropped Roehampton. And then last year I got laid off from South Bank.
But you're still, I've got to check every fact now, because I thought I'd done a bit of research, but it turns out Google's highly inaccurate. Who knew? Who knew? You are president of the
National Members Council. Yes.
Yeah. So how much of your time does that absorb? And I think you said when you were running for that presidency, your plan was to raise the profile of the movement. So what kind of plans do you have to do that?
Okay, all right. So I just got elected about I don't think I've done 50 days yet. So you got that right. Yes. So my plan to raise the profile is one is to look at because the cooperative movement is much bigger than sometimes people, when you're outside of it, it's very different. It's a different type of beast in itself. So there's a work that has to be done within the cooperative movement. So there are other cooperative society, and the co-op group is the biggest one of them all. So it's also about having a conversation with those different cooperatives and raising the profile there. I think also I'm also going to work with the Cooperative Party and trying to raise the profile wherever I can. I have an opportunity to go to different events in the calendar. So there again, that's another opportunity to raise the profile of the organisation. I mean, I'm the first Black person, full stop, in the role. To be slightly fair, Nick Croft headed it for the last 6 years. He was sort of the first president under the original structure. So it's an interesting time. Steve Morrell, the chief exec, put a very ambitious statement about wanting to address inequality as well as race. So it's kind of coming slightly on the back of that, being able to raise the profile of the organisation. I think it's a good thing, being able to raise the profile of the organisation. Yeah. No, so you're talking about it right now, so that's kind of a good way to
job done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And on that positive and optimistic note, we probably ought to end the interview here. We've run over our time. I've been having such a good time listening to you and asking you questions, Denise. I apologise for using up rather more of it than we'd anticipated, but it's been a pleasure to spend the last hour and 10 minutes with you.
Cool, excellent.
We've got a duty now to let our viewers hop onto their next Zoom call or Teams call, or perhaps even get some tea, because we're late in the afternoon now. And you've got a council to get on with running and a cooperative movement to stimulate. So accept my warmest thanks for taking part in our live interview. Viewers, this is our voice of authority, the Royal Borough of Greenwich Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Good Growth, Councillor Denise Scott-McDonald. And there's virtual applause ringing out all over the place for you, Denise. Thank you very much. And viewers, thank you for sparing the time to tune in and learn about the woman helping to shape the vision for Greenwich. Who would you like us to bring to the screen next? Let us know via the chat now. Meanwhile, I'm going to be back in a fortnight on the 24th of August at 11 a.m. with the flamboyant and outspoken and always interesting Councillor Peter Fleming, Leader and Improvement and Innovation Portfolio Holder at Sevenoaks District Council and board member of the District Council's network. You can register for that now and watch the recording of this and all our other interviews and webinars at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. So until then, from our Voice of Authority, Councillor Denise Scott-McDonald, from Carter Jonas and Future Built and GLE and London Square Partners, and from me and from everyone at 3 Fox, thanks and good afternoon.